Elara's hands are shaking, not a tremble. A violent, barely contained shaking, just enough for the hot chocolate to slosh, staining the pristine white edge of her mug. Without thinking, Santiago Virelli reaches out to steady it. And Elara flinches. It's a tiny movement. Blink, and you'd miss it entirely. But Mirela Kovač sees it, and in that fraction of a second, something deep inside her, something she's kept buried and bleeding for years, finally snaps. Touch her again, and you're dead. The words hit the air like a gunshot. In a place like La Rive Noire, the silence that follows isn't just quiet, it's suffocating, deafening. The security guys go completely rigid. The manager stops dead in his tracks. Every other conversation in the room just vanishes into thin air. Santiago doesn't blow up. He doesn't scream. He doesn't even look angry. He just turns his head. Real slow, on toward the lowly waitress who just threatened the most dangerous man in the entire city. "What did you say?" he asks. His voice is a whisper, a deadly, quiet whisper, which is infinitely more terrifying than if he had screamed. Before we dive deeper, if stories about dangerous, powerful men hiding deep wounds, and the women who survive them with quiet, unbreakable strength, mean something to you, take a second right now to subscribe. These emotionally intense underworld romance dramas about raw power and desperate poverty are for people who truly understand that love isn't always soft. Sometimes it's earned through blood and pain. Mirela's hands are trembling violently under her apron, but her eyes don't leave his. "She's scared," she says, her voice breaking just a little. 3 simple words. No insults, no accusations, just the absolute, heartbreaking truth. Santiago's eyes narrow, and then a flicker. He looks almost surprised, like it's never once, in all his dark life, crossed his mind that his own daughter might actually be terrified of him. "You're dismissed," he tells the guard standing next to Elara. The massive guy hesitates, just for a second. Santiago doesn't look at him. Now, once they're alone, Santiago does something absolutely no one expected. The ruthless boss drops down to one knee. He brings himself right down to Elara's eye level, deliberately keeping his hands back, making sure he doesn't actually touch her. "I'm sorry if I startled you," he says, his voice stripped of all its usual power, just low and raw. Elara just looks confused. Her eyes, so exactly like his, are wide. Right now she's desperately trying to figure out why this cold man, who she only sees twice a year, is suddenly acting like a completely different human being. Mirela stays frozen right where she is. Her heart is hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knows she's probably going to lose her job, maybe her life. She's got a crushing stack of bills at home, and her mom's meds are running out. But looking at the two of them, she doesn't take it back. She wouldn't take it back for the world. She knows that exact look on Elara's face, the way she's holding her breath in sheer panic, the way she's sitting so perfectly, unnaturally still. Mirela knows it because she used to sit exactly like that. Everything changes that night, not because of some fairy tale romance, but because in that dark room, they recognized a broken piece of themselves in each other. Santiago watches Mirela from across the room, a waitress, a nobody, who stood up to a monster just to protect his daughter. And as he watches her, he realizes he has absolutely no clue who she really is. Before we dive deeper, if stories about dangerous, powerful men hiding deep wounds and the women who survive them with quiet and unbreakable strength mean something to you, take a second right now to subscribe. These emotionally intense underworld romance dramas about raw power and desperate poverty are for people who truly understand that love isn't always soft. Sometimes it's earned through blood and pain. Mirela woke up the next morning with a sick, heavy pit in her stomach. She walked into her shift, fully expecting to be handed her walking papers. Instead, her manager walked up, looking pale. "Mr. Virelli specifically asked for you, in the private dining room, tonight." Mirela's breath hitched. She almost dropped the heavy tray she was holding. "Wait. Why?" The manager just gave a nervous, rigid shrug. He doesn't exactly give explanations for his requests. When evening finally rolled around, the tension in the room spiked. Santiago showed up with Elara again. The kid looked a little different this time, not quite as paralyzingly stiff as before, but way more observant. And her eyes darted around the room. She was clutching an old, beat-up teddy bear that honestly looked a little too young for her. A desperate comfort object. Mirela walked right up to the table, playing it cool. "Hot chocolate?" she asked Elara directly. She completely ignored the strict, proper restaurant protocol by talking to the child before the terrifying adult. Elara gave a small, hesitant nod. Santiago just sat there, watching them, not saying a single word. Well, when Mirela came back with the steaming drink, she caught a glimpse of a thick folder Santiago was looking through. It looked like school records, straight A's across the board, every single subject. But scrolling down, there wasn't a single note from a teacher about friends. No social stuff. Nothing. Mirela knew that look. It was the look of a kid who performs perfectly, just so she doesn't get noticed. Later on, when the room was mostly clear, Santiago caught Mirela near the kitchen doors. "Why did you say she was scared yesterday?" His voice was quiet, searching. Mirela didn't blink. She held her ground. "Because, for some of us, spotting fear isn't a guess. It's a survival skill you learn pretty early on. Some of us," he pushed, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "People who grow up having to watch everyone else's every move, just to stay safe." Something shifted in Santiago's face. It wasn't that he suddenly went soft. He was still a deeply dangerous man, but he just looked like he was rapidly recalculating everything he thought he knew about the world. "Her security team is changing," he said after a long, heavy second. "The guy from yesterday? He's gone." Mirela didn't say anything. She just swallowed hard. It wasn't her business. But that night, while she was exhausted, counting her meager tips at the end of the shift, she realized something that gave her actual chills. And Santiago hadn't talked to her like a mob boss talking to a disposable waitress. He talked to her like they were both on the exact same level. Like two people who see the dark side of the world the exact same way. Across town, the city was asleep, but Santiago was sitting alone in his sprawling, empty office, rewatching the security footage from the restaurant. Over and over. He played the exact moment Mirela stepped in between him and his daughter. It wasn't a snap decision. It wasn't just reckless anger. He could see it in her eyes on the screen. She had done the terrifying math in her head, realized the absolute risk to her own life, and decided it was worth it anyway. And she did it for a kid she didn't even know. That's what was keeping him up. It wasn't the threat to his ego. It was the staggering realization that someone was actually protecting her. For the first time in years, he wasn't the only one looking out for Elara, and he definitely never, not in a million years, expected the person doing it to be a waitress from La Rive Noire. 3 agonizing days went by, without a single sign of Santiago or Elara at La Rive Noire. Mirela started telling herself it was over, whatever it even was. Just a weird, terrifying moment she couldn't really explain, even if she didn't regret it. Then, Right as her grueling shift ended, a massive black car pulled up to the curb. Silent. Imposing. The tinted window rolled down, and Santiago was sitting in the back, swallowed by the shadows, all by himself. "Get in." Mirela didn't budge. She crossed her arms. That's not exactly the kind of invitation normal people say yes to. A flicker of something, maybe actual amusement, crossed Santiago's hard face. "Would you feel better if I said, please?" "I'd feel better if you told me why." The street was dead quiet, just the faint, distant sound of traffic a few blocks over. "Elara asked about you," Santiago finally said. That caught Mirela completely off guard. "Why?" "She said you looked at her, not through her." He paused, his voice dropping a fraction. "In her world, that doesn't happen very often." Mirela waited. Her heart was beating a little too fast, but she knew there had to be more to the story. "I want to hire you," Santiago continued, his eyes locking onto hers. "Privately. I want you to be her companion while she's here in the city. I don't know the first thing about childcare. You don't have to." He leaned forward just an inch. "You know something. Way more important." "And what's that?" "You know how to spot her fear." The words just hung there in the cold air between them. It felt heavy, strangely intimate. "Why me, though?" Mirela asked, her voice tight. "You've got unlimited money. None you can hire the absolute best professional nannies in the world." Professional nannies didn't stand up to me in the middle of a restaurant. Then came the details. It was temporary. Just 3 weeks. But the pay? The pay was insane. It was more than Mirela made in 6 months of breaking her back. He'd even provide a place to stay. "You want me to just quit my job?" Mirela was already doing the desperate math in her head. The past due rent, her mom's expensive meds, everything. Think of it as a leave of absence. Your job will be waiting for you. Of course it would. He probably owned the damn building. "When do you need to know?" Santiago checked his watch. The metal caught the streetlight. "Now." Mirela knew, deep in her gut, she should say no. This guy represented everything she despised. Too much money, too much untouchable power, and a dark reputation built entirely on making people afraid. But then, she thought about Elara, how the little girl held her breath, how she sat so perfectly, unnaturally still. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm. "But I'm doing it for her, not you." Santiago just gave a single, slow nod. "I didn't think otherwise." The estate is miles out from the city. The walls are high, high enough to keep the rest of the world at a very, very safe distance. Mirela's new room connects to Elara's through a massive shared sitting area. The space is literally bigger than her entire rundown apartment. Outside, the towering windows look out over manicured gardens that look like they were made to be stared at, not actually played in. On the very first morning, Santiago meets her in his study. The air is thick with the smell of expensive wood and dark leather. The bookshelves are packed tight, but the books actually look like they've been read, not just placed there for show. "Ground rules," Mirela says, stepping into the room and beating him to the punch. Santiago raises a dark eyebrow, but gives a slight nod for her to go ahead. "No cameras when I'm with her. No interrogation about what we talk about. And don't go over my head when it comes to her daily schedule." Mirela forces her voice to stay completely steady. She refuses to let it shake. "Also, I need to see my mom twice a week. Anything else?" There's that faint, dangerous flicker of amusement again. "Yeah, tell me why she doesn't know you're her father." The amusement vanishes. Instantly, Santiago's face shuts down like a steel vault. "She knows," he says. The temperature in the room seems to drop 10 degrees. Not from you, she doesn't. He stares at her, really truly looking at her this time. How did you? She has your exact eyes, and she watches people. Exactly the way you do. Always looking for the exits, always checking for threats. A heavy, suffocating silence stretches out between them. Her mother died 3 years ago, Santiago finally says, but the words clipped and hollow. Cancer. Before that, we both agreed that keeping her at a distance was the absolute only way to keep her safe. Safe from what? People who would use her to get to me. Mirela let the dark reality of that sink into her bones. And now? It's a temporary visit, while we fix some security issues. Then she goes back to Switzerland. That night, the quiet of the estate shatters. Elara has a nightmare. Mirela rushes in and finds her sitting bolt upright in bed, eyes wide, terrified, desperately trying to control her panicked breathing. It's okay to cry, you know, Mirela says softly, sinking onto the edge of the mattress. Elara furiously shakes her head. It doesn't help. Maybe not. But holding it all in, it just makes it feel heavier. Elara looks at her, really looks at her, turning the words over in her mind. Do you cry? Sometimes, when I need to. Does it help you? Mirela offers a sad, gentle smile. It reminds me I'm still human. They sat there in the heavy quiet until Elara finally drifted back off. But Mirela didn't leave. She pulled up a chair and stayed right there, watching over her. At sunrise, Santiago found them both asleep. Elara tucked in safe, and Mirela still pulling guard duty from the hard wooden chair. He stopped dead in the doorway, just watching them. Right then, something monumental shifted in how he saw his own broken family. It wasn't about romance. It was about raw recognition. It was two battered people who finally understood that being safe means having someone who sees your deepest fear and refuses to use it against you. Pale morning light peeks through the heavy curtains as Elara carefully spreads a stack of photos across her bedroom floor. It looks like a solemn ritual, Mirela realizes. The kid isn't looking at them for the warm memories. She's organizing them by date, like a sterile filing system. This is my mom, Elara says quietly, pointing to a woman with exhausted eyes and a gentle, faded smile. Mirela notices it right away. A chill runs down her spine. The edges of the photos, they're all trimmed. Someone was meticulously, deliberately cut out of the frame. "Who took these?" she asks, forcing her voice to stay casual. Elara doesn't miss a beat. Someone who left. The way she says it is way too controlled for a little kid. It's not just a childhood grudge. It's like she's protecting a dark secret she's spent years practicing how to keep. In one of the pictures, you can still see the jagged edge of a man's shoulder. Expensive suit fabric. The exact same charcoal shade Santiago always wears. Later, while Elara is completely absorbed in her schoolwork, Mirela takes a cautious walk around the sprawling grounds. The gardens feel more like a pristine museum than a backyard. Hidden security cameras track her every single move. It's a suffocating amount of protection, but absolutely zero warmth. Santiago finds her near the far stone wall. She organizes her photos like she's doing her taxes, Mirela tells him, keeping her eyes on the horizon. Precision gives you control, Santiago replies smoothly. Is that what you taught her? His silence is deafening. It says everything she needs to know. For she keeps asking about some foundation that paid for her school. Mirela pushes on. She says her mom mentioned it right before she passed away. Santiago's jaw tightens instantly. She's not supposed to know about that. Kids notice way more than adults give them credit for, Santiago. That afternoon, The tension breaks. Santiago locks himself in his sprawling office. He's digging frantically through a dusty stack of old financial reports on his desk, looking for something specific. Suddenly, his hand stops dead. It rests on a yellowing liquidation paper from 8 years ago. The bold letters at the top read, Kovač Manufacturing. The pieces start crashing into place. Across town, in a cramped, faded apartment, Mirela's mom is sorting her pills into those little plastic weekly containers when her phone rings. "Did you know who he was when you took this job?" her mother asks, her voice trembling after Mirela explains where she's been staying. "He's just some rich guy." Mom," Mirela says, confused. There's a long, terrifying silence on the other end of the line. "Mirela, the foundation that helped us out after your dad's factory went under. You should probably check who actually funds it." Back at the sprawling estate, Santiago is staring blindly at the name on the document. Kovač, the brave waitress who threatened him, the woman he somehow trusted to watch his only daughter, is the daughter of a man whose entire life's work collapsed during one of Santiago's ruthless corporate takeovers. He didn't know. He didn't even notice the lives he ruined. But not knowing doesn't change what he did. The world just got a whole lot smaller and a lot more dangerous. Before we continue, if you're still watching, it means you feel this tension too. These stories aren't just drama. They're about fierce loyalty, hidden sacrifices, and broken people choosing love over their own pride. Hitting that subscribe button tells me you want more stories, where true strength hides behind silence. The sun is just starting to go down when it finally happens. Santiago is waiting out in the garden, papers spread all over the cold stone table. Reports about the factory closing, bank transfers, trust fund documents. Mirela walks up slowly. Her heart absolutely drops as she spots her dad's name on the very top page. "More, you knew," she says. Her hands are shaking, but she forces her voice to stay dead level. "Not until yesterday," Santiago admits. A heavy, suffocating silence settles between them. "Your father's factory was liquidated during a merger," Santiago says, his voice flat, precise. "I never actually looked at the names of the workers who lost their jobs. We were just numbers on a page to you," Mirela says quietly. "Yes." The brutal honesty actually catches her off guard. No excuses. No sugarcoating it. "My dad stopped eating after that place closed," she says, the words pouring out now, raw and bleeding. "He stopped sleeping. He aged 10 years in a matter of months." Santiago doesn't try to interrupt her. "He built that place from absolutely nothing. When it fell apart, he fell apart right along with it." She looks him dead in the eye. "Men like you have no idea what your power actually does to people like us." Santiago doesn't even try to defend himself. You're right. That admission changes the energy in the air. Doesn't make things better, but it makes them terrifyingly real. "The foundation that helped your family after the factory went under," Santiago continues, "is funded by the exact same trust that protects Elara." The sickening irony of it makes Mirela's stomach turn. "So you were destroying my family, at the exact same time you were protecting yours." "Yes." "So why didn't you fire me the second you found out who I was?" Santiago thinks about it for a beat. "Because you saw something I didn't." "What?" How scared she is. Mirela knows she should walk away right now. Quit the job, leave the massive house, and get as far away as possible from the man who broke her father's spirit. But if she leaves Elara all alone. "Does she even know you're her father?" Mirela asks him again. Santiago freezes. "How did you—" "She has your eyes, and when she's scared, she holds her breath the exact same way you do when you're pissed off." Later that night, before heading to her own room, Mirela slides a single handwritten note under Santiago's heavy door. Distance isn't protection, it's just being gone. Santiago reads those words 7 times, and they hurt a lot worse than any threat she could have made. It's pouring outside. The rain is streaking down the massive windows, while Santiago and Elara sit across from each other at breakfast. I'm standing by the door, and the tension in the room is so thick, you could cut it with a knife. "We need to talk," Santiago says. His voice sounds stiff, way too formal. Elara sets her silver fork down perfectly. "About what?" "About why you're here. About who I am to you." The kid doesn't flinch, but I notice her tiny fingers tightening around her napkin. "I knew your mother," Santiago says, choosing his words like he's walking through a live minefield. "We were very close once." "I know," Elara says. Just like that. Santiago freezes. "What exactly do you know?" "That you're my father." The whole room goes completely, uncomfortably quiet. Santiago just stares at her. It's the very first time I've ever seen the most dangerous man in the city look truly, genuinely rattled. "How long have you known?" he finally asks, his voice barely a whisper. "Since Mom got sick," Elara says. Her voice is eerily steady. "She told me before she died. She said you stayed away. To keep me safe." You can practically see Santiago's carefully built excuses falling apart in real time. "Yes, that's true." "Safe from what?" "From people who would try to hurt you, just to get to me." Elara thinks about that with a maturity that is honestly heartbreaking. Do you have any other kids?" "No." "Then I'm your only weakness." The way she says it, like a sterile math problem instead of a family tragedy, is devastating. This 10-year-old girl understands brutal power moves better than she understands being loved. "You're not a weakness," Santiago says, his voice cracking. "Then why did you leave me?" That single question just shreds whatever armor he had left. Santiago reaches across the table, his hand trembling slightly, but he stops himself the second he sees her tense up. "Because I thought being far away was the only way to protect you," he admits, utterly defeated. "I was wrong." Elara doesn't cry. She doesn't even move. She just watches him with those ancient eyes that have seen way too much. "Are you coming back now?" "I want to," Santiago says, "if you'll let me." Later that afternoon, I find Santiago completely alone in his dark office, just staring off into space. "She's reading," I tell him. She said she needs some time to think." "She talks like a grown woman," he says quietly. "Because she never got the chance to be a kid, Santiago." He looks up at me, his eyes sharp and desperate again. "I gave her everything she ever needed." "Except you," I cut him off. "Money isn't love." "How do I fix this?" he asks. He sounds completely, totally lost. I didn't even have to think about it. "You don't fix people. You just stay close to them while they heal themselves." That night, for the very first time since I got here, Elara left her bedroom door open. It's a small step, but it's a start. The envelope shows up at breakfast 3 days later. No stamps, no return address, nothing. Santiago opens it while Elara is busy telling me about some book she's reading. His face barely changes, but I'm watching him close. I see the dark flicker in his eyes. I know exactly when things go south. Inside the envelope are surveillance photos. It's Elara and me in the garden. Us walking by the perimeter wall. Us in the library. It's not just mail. It's a death threat. "We're leaving," Santiago says. He sounds dead calm, but you can practically feel the violent tension coming off him in waves. "Pack the essentials, now." 30 minutes later, we're tearing down the highway in a car with pitch-black windows. No one explains anything, but honestly, no one has to. Someone figured out his weak spot. About halfway through the frantic drive, I notice a car trailing us. So it's not being obvious about it, but it's staying at a very consistent, very deliberate distance. "Third car back," I say quietly to Santiago, not turning my head. "That blue sedan. It's been there since we left the house." Santiago looks at me, and I can tell he's stunned. "How'd you know to look for that?" "When you grow up with absolutely nothing, you learn to spot patterns," I tell him coldly, "especially the ones that feel like trouble." The safe house is tucked deep into the mountains. It's way smaller than the estate. Less flashy, but a hell of a lot harder to see. While Elara is anxiously checking out her new room, Santiago pulls me aside. "That foundation that helped your family after the factory shut down," he says, getting straight to the point. "I'm the one who started it, 8 years ago." I just stare at him. "Why?" "Because I finally understood something about power," he says, his voice tight. "It creates an obligation." "You mean you felt guilty?" "At first. Yeah," he admits. His blunt honesty is almost annoying. "Later, it became a responsibility." He pulls up some encrypted files on his tablet, showing me how the shadow money moves. The foundation that fed my family and the trust fund for Elara, they are basically 2 branches of the exact same tree. The same account that paid for your dad's doctors pays for Elara's school, he explains. I set it up so that looking out for one meant looking out for both. It's a massive and a heavy thing to wrap my head around. For years, our entirely different lives have been tangled up in this invisible web he built. "You've been looking after her," Santiago says softly, "and I've been looking after your father." Outside, the dark clouds are rolling in over the jagged peaks. There's a storm coming. "Who sent those pictures?" I ask. "Someone who knows that Elara isn't my only weakness anymore." He looks me right in the eye, and the intensity almost burns. "It's also the woman, who told me she'd kill me if I touched her daughter." That night, Elara nervously asks if she can sleep in my room. Neither of us argues. The way we're protecting each other is starting to change. It's not just a job or a survival strategy anymore. It's starting to feel like a family. A sleek black car pulls up to the safe house the next morning. It's expensive, but trying real hard not to be noticed. "I'm not expecting anyone," Santiago says, his eyes glued to the security monitors, his hand resting near his holster. The man who steps out is wearing a sharp suit and carrying a leather briefcase. It's Victor Kane, Santiago's money guy for the last 15 years. "We need to talk," Victor says, the absolute second Santiago opens the door. "In private." Santiago leads him into the heavy study. I'm out in the kitchen making breakfast with Elara, keeping a very close eye on things. "Who's that?" I ask, trying to keep my voice casual. Elara's hand stops midair. "He used to come see my mom sometimes." I look at her, surprised. "When?" "After we moved, he'd bring papers for her to sign." Elara lowers her voice to a whisper. She didn't like him at all. A cold, sickening knot starts to form in the pit of my stomach. Later on, while Victor and Santiago are locked in the study, I help Elara unpack her stuff. That old teddy bear of hers is sitting on the bed, looking a little worse for wear, with one ear starting to fray. "You've had this guy forever." "Huh?" I say, forcing a smile. "Since I was 4, Elara tells me. He goes everywhere I go." I pick up the bear, and it feels off. It's way too heavy for a stuffed animal. I run my fingers along the back seam and feel something hard inside. I make a quick excuse to go grab a glass of water and take the bear into the bathroom. I find a tiny, hidden slit in the fabric, and there it is. A tracking device, sewn right into the stuffing. My heart is hammering violently against my ribs as I walk back out, only to find Victor standing right in Elara's doorway. "Just checking on our little princess," he says, He's smiling, but his eyes are like ice. I step right in front of him, totally blocking the way. She's resting. Of course. Victor looks me up and down with pure disgust. So, you're Santiago's new project, the little waitress who's supposedly so brave. The second he leaves, I go hunting for Santiago. I find him at his desk, buried in paperwork. We need to talk, I start to say. A massive explosion cuts me off. It's far away, but loud enough to make the reinforced windows rattle violently in their frames. "Get down!" Santiago yells, tackling me to the hard floor just as the perimeter alarms start screaming. Men come crashing through the front windows. These aren't just some random thugs. They're pros, tactical gear, moving like a hit team. My Santiago reaches for his gun just as the study door violently kicks open. Victor is standing there, holding a leveled pistol. "Always thinking you're 10 steps ahead," Victor says, looking down at Santiago with a sneer. "But you completely missed the rat in your own house." "Why, Victor?" Santiago asks, his voice like venom. 8 years of skimming off the top. Millions you never even noticed because you were too busy hiding your precious secret daughter. Victor's smile turns totally nasty. Those factory closures? That was a very profitable side business for me. The room feels like it's spinning. It was Victor. He was the one who shut down my father's factory, not Santiago. "Take them," Victor tells his heavily armed guys. "She's just a kid," I beg, struggling against the hands grabbing me. "He's not the big protector he thinks he is," Victor says smoothly. "And now, I've got his daughter, and the woman he's trying so incredibly hard not to fall for. Right here, when everything feels entirely uncertain. This is why this channel exists, for viewers who believe even the most feared man in the world can carry deep regret. And even the poorest woman can carry unbreakable dignity. If that belief resonates with you, subscribe and stay with us. The crumbling walls of the abandoned factory look like giant ghosts in the pale moonlight. Kovač Manufacturing. Mirela stares out the dirty van window, feeling physically sick to her stomach. This exact place was her father's entire life's work, and now it's just a hollowed-out, rotting shell being used to keep his own daughter prisoner. Inside, Victor's massive guys start pulling them apart. Elara's eyes, wide with sheer, absolute panic, lock onto Mirela's as they're violently separated. "Be brave," Mirela whispers fiercely. "Just like your dad." The little girl gives a single, terrified nod, her chin lifting in that exact same stubborn way Santiago always does. They lock Mirela in what used to be her father's main office. The desk is long gone, and the windows are all heavily boarded up, but she sees it. The tiny, faded etching her dad carved into the doorframe years ago. Her initials, from a visit she took when she was just a little kid. She traces the rough letters with her trembling finger, and something deep inside her just hardens into steel. Agonizing hours crawl by. Eventually, the heavy door groans open. Victor walks in alone. "Well, I'd have to hand it to you. I severely underestimated you," he says, casually watching her. The little waitress who threatened Santiago Virelli and actually lived to tell the tale. "Where's Elara?" Mirela spits. "She's safe, for now." Victor leans back arrogantly against the dirty wall. Santiago is actually pretty easy to predict once you figure out his two big weaknesses. "You mean his daughter. And you." Victor gives her a cold, calculated smile. The woman who noticed his kid was scared, when he couldn't even see it himself. Mirela doesn't give him the satisfaction of a response. She just glares. "I sent him my terms," Victor says, casually checking his expensive watch. "His entire business empire, in exchange for your lives. Though I'm absolutely dying to know which one he'd pick if I forced him to choose." "You're assuming we need him to save us," Mirela says quietly. Victor just laughs out loud. "Against my guys? No, you definitely do. The absolute second he leaves, Mirela starts tearing the dark room apart. She remembers the massive ventilation system from when she was a kid. Her dad used to proudly show her how everything worked. The rusty duct above the radiator is way too small for her. But for a 10-year-old girl, it's a way out. When they brutally shove Elara back into the room an hour later, Mirela pulls her into a fiercely tight hug. She whispers directly into the girl's ear, telling her exactly where the dark vents go and how the entire building is laid out. "I'm not leaving without you," Elara whispers back, her voice shaking with tears. "Your dad is coming for us," Mirela promises, holding her face. "But I need you to get safe first. Okay?" That night, right when the exhausted guards are swapping their shifts, Mirela makes her final move. She remembers the old fire alarm wiring her dad showed her during construction. She rips the panel off the wall and violently messes with the exposed wires until the alarm starts screaming. In the sudden, blinding chaos, Mirela hoists Elara up toward the open vent. "Go straight until the third turn, then hang a hard right. It'll take you outside. What about you? I'll be right behind you." Mirela lies seamlessly, giving her a brave, reassuring look. "Now go. Move." As Elara disappears into the pitch-black duct, Mirela turns around to face the heavy door, just as the furious guards burst in. "Until he gets here," she whispers to herself, raising her fists. "You've got me to deal with." Santiago stands perfectly still in his command center, surrounded by glowing monitors tracking every single move Victor has made over the last 10 years. Now that he knows exactly where to look, the dark patterns are impossible to miss. Victor wasn't just managing the money. He was systematically, deliberately gutting the organization from the inside, always calling it restructuring. And then there was Kovač Manufacturing. Victor's forged signature is all over the closure papers for that factory, and 26 others exactly like it. Santiago hadn't signed a single one, but he knows deep in his gut that not knowing doesn't get him off the hook. He was the boss. He let it happen. Victor's encrypted message pops up right on time. "Surrender everything by midnight, or neither of them makes it out." Santiago's head of security walks up, looking visibly tense. "Sir, we found them. They're holding them at the old Kovač plant." The brutal irony of it feels like a physical punch to the gut. "It's an absolute fortress," the guy continues grimly. "And we have no idea what the floor plan looks like inside." "I might know someone who does," Santiago says, his eyes narrowing. Across town, Mirela Kovač cautiously opens her front door, only to find the most dangerous man in the city standing on her porch. Her face turns to absolute stone the second she sees him. "My daughter is missing," Santiago says, his voice raw, before she can even get a word out. "And why is that my problem?" Elena's voice is sharp as a blade, carrying years of built-up, agonizing bitterness. "Because she's with your daughter, at your husband's old factory." Elena's fierce expression falters for just a fraction of a second. "Mirela?" Santiago lays it all out. He doesn't beg, and he certainly doesn't bark orders, but he just gives her the cold, terrifying facts. "Why on earth would I ever help you?" Elena asks when he's done. "Your people destroyed my husband." "Victor destroyed your husband," Santiago says fiercely. "And I let him do it, because I wasn't paying attention." Being blind to people's pain doesn't mean you aren't responsible for it. "No," Santiago agrees heavily. "It doesn't." They stand there in the heavy silence for a long, painful moment. "The factory had a highly unique ventilation system," Elena finally says, her voice breaking just a little. "My husband designed the whole thing himself." She goes to a locked cabinet and pulls out a massive stack of architectural drawings. They're old and yellowed, kept for years out of pure grief, even though they were supposed to be completely useless. Mirela knows these vents inside and out, Elena says, tracing the faded blue lines. She used to play hide-and-seek in that building when she was a little girl. She points out the hidden access points and the specific blind spots in the security. Information kept strictly out of love. That was now a life-or-death tactical map. As Santiago turns to leave, Elena steps forward and grabs his arm. She is the first person who's dared to touch him without permission in years. "If anything happens to my girl," she says, her voice low and incredibly dangerous, "just remember, I know exactly who you are now, and I know where you live." It's the exact same threat Mirela made back at the restaurant. The same fire, the exact same look in her eyes. Santiago sees the resemblance instantly. "I'll bring her back," he promises, his voice like iron. "Don't do it for me," Elena snaps. "Do it for her." Santiago gives a single heavy nod. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The massive guards drag Mirela roughly across the concrete factory floor. Her lip is violently split and bleeding. Her hands are tightly bound behind her back, but she isn't bowing her head for anyone. "The kid got away," one of the guys tells Victor, who's standing arrogantly by the loading dock. Victor doesn't even flinch. "She won't get far." "Your guys will never find her," Mirela says, her voice sounding way steadier than she feels. She knows exactly what to do. She's not stopping until she's completely safe. Victor looks at her, actually curious now. That's some highly impressive planning. It's almost like, "You know your way around this place." "My father built this place," Mirela spits, pulling herself up as tall as she can. "Long before guys like you decided his entire life was just a line on a spreadsheet." You can physically see the light bulb go off in Victor's twisted head. "Kovač's daughter. Of course." He gives a short, nasty laugh. Santiago really has a knack for finding the most poetic, tragic coincidences. Suddenly, the violent shouting breaks out from the west side of the building. Then, the heavy gunshots start. "Right on time," Victor says, drawing his weapon. "I was counting on Santiago showing up." The brutal fighting gets louder, moving closer and closer. Victor violently grabs Mirela and pulls her toward the main entrance, shoving the cold steel barrel of his gun hard against her temple. "Let's give him a warm welcome." Santiago walks through the smoke like a man on an absolute mission, and heavily backed up by his best guys. The second he sees Mirela, his eyes lock onto hers. "Let her go," he says. His voice is deadly, perfectly quiet over the ringing of gunfire. "This is between you and me." "Drop the guns first," Victor shouts back, pressing the barrel harder. The terrifying standoff lasts only a few seconds, but it feels like an eternity. Then, Mirela moves. She violently throws a sharp elbow straight back into Victor's ribs, a desperate move she learned in self-defense classes years ago. After her dad's life fell apart, she realized she had to be the one to protect herself. Victor gasps and stumbles back. His gun goes off. Santiago screams her name and lunges forward as Mirela hits the cold concrete. Everything after that is a chaotic, violent blur. Guards dropping. The look of pure, a terrified shock on Victor's face as Santiago physically reaches him, and the cold, brutal justice in Santiago's dark eyes. Then, finally, it's quiet. Santiago is immediately on his knees next to Mirela, his large hands pressed frantically against her wound. "Stay with me," he commands, and for the very first time in his life, his voice sounds like it's breaking. "Elara," Mirela whispers weakly, her breathing shallow. "Did she make it?" "Yeah. She's safe. She came out the east exit, exactly like you told her." Mirela closes her eyes, a look of pure, absolute relief washing over her pale face. "Your daughter. She's so brave." "She learned it from you," Santiago says, lifting her up into his arms as gently as if she were made of spun glass. As he carries her through the smoking wreckage of the factory, Santiago looks down at her. This incredible woman saw his daughter's fear when he was blind to it. She fiercely protected his kid without even knowing they were related. She made sure the girl got out, even if it meant dying behind herself. "Why?" he asks softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Why would you risk absolutely everything for her?" Mirela opens her eyes just a crack, despite the agonizing pain. "Because someone had to." At the sterile hospital, the exhausted doctors say she's going to be okay. The bullet narrowly missed anything vital. Santiago doesn't leave her room, not for a second. He just stays there, totally reversing their roles. Now he's the one pulling guard duty while she heals. Outside the window, the sun is finally starting to come up over the bruised city. The light is hitting places that have been in the dark for a very, very long time. The hospital lights are dim, casting long, quiet shadows across the room when Mirela finally flutters her eyes open. It takes her a foggy second to remember where she is. Then, she spots Elara sitting quietly in a chair nearby, totally focused on a worn sketchbook. "You're finally awake," the girl says, looking up with massive relief. Mirela tries to smile, though her bandaged side still absolutely kills her. "How long was I out?" 3 days. Elara walks over, moving quiet and soft. "Father said I shouldn't wake you up." Father. Not Santiago. It's a tiny, tiny change, but it means everything. Elara proudly shows off her drawings, page after page of 3 people standing close together. There are no names or labels, just 3 figures forming a tight, unbreakable little triangle of protection. "Is that us?" Mirela asks softly. Elara just nods. "That's how I see it now." As the quiet days go by and Mirela starts to heal, Santiago shows up every single day. He spends the time sitting by her bed, telling her exactly how he's permanently dismantling Victor's old crew and radically changing the way he runs things. Less looking over shoulders, more actual structure. "The foundation is growing," he tells her one night, while Elara is napping on the couch. "We're setting up real substantial support for workers who lost their jobs." "Handouts don't change the world, Santiago," Mirela says gently. He thinks about that for a second. "No, but taking that massive power and putting it in the right place can." He shows her some digital plans on his tablet. They're completely turning the old factory, the terrible place where it all went down, into a massive community center. The bold name on the top of the blueprints reads, "The Kovač Community Foundation." "Why do all this?" Mirela asks, her throat tight. Santiago looks at her, his expression more open and unguarded than she's ever seen it. "Because being far away was never about protection. It was just me being a coward. And calling it a strategy." His quiet words sounded exactly like the note she'd slid under his door all those weeks ago. Once Mirela gets a little stronger, Santiago actually brings her mom by for a visit. Elena still looks like she's completely ready for a fight, but she softens instantly the second Elara starts excitedly telling her how Mirela saved the day. "You raised a daughter who doesn't back down," Santiago tells Elena when they're finally alone in the hall. "And you almost lost yours by being a ghost," Elena fires back sharply. Santiago doesn't even try to argue. He bows his head. He knows she's absolutely right. One evening, Mirela slowly walks out and finds Santiago in the hospital garden, completely lost in thought under the stars. "Doctors say I'm good to go home tomorrow," she says quietly. "And where is home?" The question just hangs there in the cool air. It's a lot heavier than it sounds. "My apartment, I guess." Mirela watches him very closely. "Unless You've got a better idea? Elara asked if you'd stay with us. Santiago's deep voice is intensely careful, like he's trying desperately to keep it neutral. She calls you family now. The word family feels incredibly fragile. But it's real. That night, Elara falls asleep right between them, Santiago sitting in the chair, and Mirela resting in the bed. 3 people. 1 triangle, exactly like the drawing. The bright morning sun is streaming into Santiago's massive office when he lays the heavy offer on the table. It's a real, binding job contract for Mirela, a completely legitimate position running the new Kovač Foundation. The salary attached to it is more than enough for her to never, ever have to worry about money again. Why not just cut me a check? Mirela asks, looking skeptically at the thick papers. It'd be a lot simpler. Because you wouldn't take it, Santiago says, leaning back. Martin, because you're actually the absolute best person for the job. Mirela carefully looks over the fine print. This says I report to an independent board, not to you. That's right. Why? Santiago doesn't skip a single beat. Because I finally learned that controlling someone isn't the same thing as protecting them. Mirela doesn't sign it right away. Total financial freedom sounds like an absolute dream, but staying this close to Santiago's dangerous world is complicated. I need some time to think, she tells him honestly. Take all the time you need. But the real, brutal world doesn't wait. Within a few days, the violent threats start bubbling up again. Some of Santiago's old, ruthless associates aren't happy at all with how he's changing things, and they start sending warnings. Security gets intensely tight at the estate where Mirela and Elara are staying for now. The hit comes right at dusk, so 3 heavily armed guys manage to quietly jump the massive fence on the east side of the property. Santiago catches them in the garden. Mirela is watching the whole terrifying thing unfold from the kitchen window, when she suddenly sees one of the guys circling around behind Santiago's back with a weapon. She moves on pure, unfiltered instinct. She violently grabs a heavy kitchen knife, years of living in tough neighborhoods, and watching her back finally kicking in. She sprints out. So she doesn't kill the guy, but she fiercely distracts him, just long enough for Santiago to spin around and brutally take control of the situation. Later, after the bleeding security team hauls the screaming guys away, Mirela finds Santiago slumped in his study. You took off your armor, she says, her voice shaking slightly. Why? Santiago looks utterly exhausted. For the first time, the untouchable boss actually looks human. Even vulnerable. Because a brave waitress told me my own daughter was terrified of me. He keeps his voice painfully low. And to me, that mattered way more than being the most feared man in the city. The raw honesty of it hits Mirela incredibly hard. Is that really enough of a reason to flip your whole life upside down? She asks. Yes. He doesn't even hesitate. That night, Mirela finally picks up the heavy pen. She signs the contract, but not before deliberately adding one line in her own messy handwriting. Independence and partnership. Equals, not boss and employee. Santiago reads it and signs his name right underneath hers without saying a single word. When he looks up, they just lock eyes. It's not quite love yet, but it's something way, way deeper than just a physical attraction. It's absolute understanding. A year can change a lot more than just the date on a calendar. The sprawling Kovač Community Center now stands proudly right where that old, decaying factory used to be. Instead of dark shadows and dust, the whole massive place is filled with bright sunlight and real people actually doing something with their lives. Elara splits her time between her prestigious school in Switzerland and coming home. And these are real visits now, not just sterile security check-ins that last 10 minutes. The awful nightmares don't come around as much anymore. Nah, and when they do, she actually has real people who sit on her bed with her, instead of just watching her through a cold monitor from another room. Santiago has heavily stepped back from the brutal day-to-day grind of his dark businesses. He's not completely retired, exactly. He's just finally learned how to share the heavy load. He realized that holding on to all the power just makes you a giant target. And it keeps you completely lonely. Mirela runs the foundation entirely on her own terms. Her fierce mom even sits proudly on the board of directors. It feels like a quiet, profound kind of justice, the kind that actually sticks. As for Santiago and Mirela, they didn't rush into anything. They built intense, mutual respect long before they ever worried about romance. They learned to truly trust each other before they got physically close. It feels completely right because they let it happen naturally. One warm afternoon, Santiago is standing quietly by the entrance of the center, watching Mirela expertly talk shop with some powerful local leaders. She's got this incredible confidence now that comes from actually liking what she does, not just because of who she knows. A slick local government official leans in toward Santiago, lowering his voice like they're sharing a dirty secret. "Look, I get why you're looking out for Ms. Kovač," the guy says smoothly. "Nah, but she's starting to cause some serious headaches with these new worker rights programs." "Is that so?" Santiago says, keeping his deep voice real casual, though his eyes harden. "Maybe just remind her who gave her this job in the first place." The guy gives a smug, ugly little smile. With her history, she's incredibly lucky to even be here. Mirela walks up right then. She definitely heard him. She looks at Santiago for a split second, then turns her fiery focus right onto the official. "You think I don't know who he is?" she asks, her voice steady and dangerously strong. "I know exactly who he is, and he knows exactly who I am." The guy backs off pretty damn quick. He knows a completely losing battle when he sees one. Later, as the sun sets, Santiago finds Mirela in what used to be her dad's old office. "You looked out for my daughter, before you even knew she belonged to me," he says softly. "And you looked out for my dad, without knowing he was mine," she shoots back with a gentle smile. The very stuff that used to violently keep them apart is the exact same thing that keeps them tightly together now. Elara walks in then, smiling, perfectly finishing that little triangle that started with a heated, terrifying threat in a restaurant over a year ago. They're not a perfect family, not by a long shot, but they're a fiercely chosen one. No more keeping their distance, no more living in absolute fear. Just three unbroken people who finally, truly, see each other. If this incredible story moved you, don't just close the video. Stay connected. Subscribe right now so you don't miss the next story, where true love has to fight absolute power just to survive.